daft cow who reads the weather on ITV.
Well, that's all from us this week.
Join us next week when we'll have more good news for you, including the results of Cecil Parkinson's lab test.
Well, there we are, ladies and gentlemen. We're winding up now, but on the way home we'll be sure to drop in to the Golden Pagoda for one of their superb Chinese meals at reasonable prices.
Right, so why not fill up your car with that heavenly odour, drop in and try the Golden Pagoda.
As the tears of laughter dry, the cans have gone wide, as the curtain starts to fall, good night, God bless to one and all. As the laughter turns to tears, half an hour can seem like years. Here's a list of cast and crew, Christ alone knows what they do.
Just remember, if you're tired and you feel you can't go on, stop for a bit.
That's it, there we go, time to keep it, someone play this bit. This is the end of it, no tiny tidbit. Someone has started to go thick, this is the end. Good night.
And we come face to face with Smith & Jones once again a week tomorrow.
Christmas on BBC1. A one-man show from Jasper Carrott.
And all those imponderable questions of life, like, why do women pluck their eyebrows? That's kept me going for years, that. I could never figure it out. You stand in front of a mirror with a great big pair of tweezers, yanking out every single hair with incredible amounts of pain, and when you finish, you get this big black crown and you fill the damn things back in again.
24 Carat Gold, Friday at 9:30 on BBC1.
It's nothing to be scared of.
Poltergeist II in 15 minutes. And that's after the news now with Chris Lowe at 10:10.
The Soviet Parliament gives President Gorbachev sweeping new powers. He now directly controls 15 republics and the economy, and he names his choice for vice president. British troops practice breaching Iraqi defences as they are warned to be ready for an attack at any moment. Good evening. The Soviet Parliament has granted much wider powers to President Gorbachev. He now has the right to suspend the working of governments in individual republics, and in emergencies he can rule by decree. After winning these new powers, Mr. Gorbachev nominated as vice president a man who's seen as an old-style bureaucrat. Gennady Yanayev is a trade union leader and a member of the Politburo. Earlier in the day, Mr. Gorbachev announced that his prime minister, Nikolai Ryzhkov, had suffered a heart attack. Tonight, his condition has worsened and is said to be causing grave concern.
The complex series of votes to change the constitution and grant Mr. Gorbachev vastly increased presidential powers is now complete. He'll have a cabinet under his direct control and a vice president who will deputise in his absence. This afternoon, Mr. Gorbachev nominated Gennady Yanayev for the new post, declaring he was an experienced politician and an active supporter of perestroika. Mr. Yanayev, a former leader of the official trade union movement, is seen as something of an old-style bureaucrat, but he immediately declared his commitment to reform.
From the very beginning, I want you to understand me properly. I've supported Mr. Gorbachev's course on perestroika, and it is accepted both by my mind and by my heart.
Only this morning, though, Mr. Yanayev said the Communist Party was seeking an alliance with the hardline group of deputies known as Soyuz, another indication of the growing influence of the right wing here. Earlier, deputies were told by Mr. Gorbachev that the Prime Minister, Nikolai Ryzhkov, had suffered a heart attack and is in hospital. Mr. Ryzhkov's been under considerable pressure to resign recently, blamed for much of the economic chaos and criticised for holding up the pace of reform. On paper, President Gorbachev now has direct control of the government of the country. The question is how far he's prepared to go to impose the will of the Kremlin on those republics that no longer accept its authority. Carol Walker, BBC News, Moscow.
The commander of the British forces in the Gulf has warned the Allies to be on constant alert for an Iraqi attack. Earlier, Allied forces boarded another Iraqi ship suspected of sanctions busting. Iraq condemned the move as piracy. Meanwhile, the troop build-up prior to the UN deadline is continuing.
The holiday, such as it was here, is over. The build-up continues, and there are growing doubts whether the US Army will be ready in time for the mid-January deadline. It has 1,000 main battle tanks in the country and another 2 divisions still on the way from Germany. These figures given at the first of probably many press briefings near the military headquarters in Riyadh. The military also revealed their guess at Saddam Hussein's intentions.
We see absolutely no indication that Saddam Hussein intends to withdraw from Kuwait. Rather, he continues to pour both men and materiel into the country and along his flank to the west. Construction of defenses continues unabated.
These are the defences that the British have copied out in the desert to give their combat engineers the experience of breaching them. Now the Americans have added their estimate of what the Iraqis have dug and built to stop them.
Ground fortifications are formidable, but they're more of World War I vintage, and we'll be looking at a technological superior force going after that sort of defenses.
But the British today were voicing a further concern. Their force commander, General Sir Peter de la Billière, was suggesting that in the time available to him, Saddam Hussein might attempt a preemptive strike.
He will do something to try and take the initiative. And if he decides that he's going down the military road, then he will try to take a military initiative, and that initiative could well happen before the 15th of January. So there's nothing sacrosanct about the 15th of January in military terms.
The newly arrived British brigade starts moving into the desert tomorrow. When it gets there, the entire British division will be ready for action in an emergency. Martin Bell, BBC News, Saudi Arabia.
A resumption of contacts between American and Iraqi diplomats has led to renewed hope that the diplomatic process to avert war has not yet been exhausted. No details, however, have emerged from the discussions between the most senior American diplomat in Baghdad and the Iraqi deputy foreign minister. But it's rumoured that they concern setting up a top-level meeting between America and Iraq. Meanwhile, an international group has set up a peace camp at a spot which could be in the firing line if war breaks out.
35 people from 12 countries headed southwest from Baghdad on Christmas Eve. They have, of course, been seized upon by Iraq's propaganda effort, but when they met a demonstration along the way of people chanting the praises of Saddam Hussein, a German woman asked them to chant for peace instead, and they duly did. Their camp is only 5 miles from the Saudi border. The peace campaigners had wanted to establish themselves between the two armies, but whether there actually are Western forces on the other side of the sand dunes, where the wild dogs of the desert do their scavenging, it's impossible to say. The range of backgrounds and age is wide. One American fought in Vietnam with a regiment now deployed across the Saudi border.
I'm here in Iraq asking the questions why before the loss of life, before the loss of life, and I think most Americans should ask themselves the same question of why President Bush has got troops here.
The British peace activist Pat Arrowsmith hoped the troops themselves wouldn't fight.
That any soldiers thinking of fighting each other would have second thoughts and lay down their arms.
They spent their Christmas night in prayers for peace. No one's been talking peace for 10 days now, and the idea of face-to-face talks between Washington and Baghdad seem to be fading. Tonight, though, it's been learned that new contacts have been taking place between the American embassy and the Iraqi government, and the embassy says it hasn't given up hopes for the diplomatic process. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
Iran's spiritual leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has said the death threat against the author Salman Rushdie must stand. That's despite Mr. Rushdie's promise not to bring out a paperback version of the Satanic Verses.
Salman Rushdie, who's recently emerged from hiding, has repudiated all offensive remarks against Islam made by characters in his book. He's also promised not to publish the paperback version of the Satanic Verses or permit additional translations as long as the novel risks causing further offence. His undertakings are not enough. Iran's current spiritual leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, today declared that the death sentence was irrevocable. Supporters of Salman Rushdie say the pronouncement is a predictable result of rivalries between different sects of Muslims.
Every threat that is made of this kind makes his life that much more precarious and indeed his freedom a little bit further away. But I think that the major agreement that has been reached paves the way for there to be dialogue between the two major sects, and one can only hope that that now will take place.
Salman Rushdie was advised by an Islamic newspaper in Iran today that he should prepare himself for a brave death.
The former King of Romania is back in Switzerland after making his first visit to his homeland since his forced abdication 40 years ago. King Michael was expelled after spending 12 hours on Romanian soil. He'd gained entry on a Danish passport.
As far as I could make out was that he saw the passport, they stamped the thing on, and then they suddenly got a fright because they realized who we were.
The Romanian government described King Michael as arrogant. The Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd will face questions in the Commons about the death of a British journalist in Chile. A court there has ruled that Jonathan Moyle was murdered. He had not committed suicide, as the authorities had previously claimed. Mr. Moyle was in Santiago investigating a Chilean arms deal. A big rescue operation is underway in the North Sea, where a gas rig support ship is drifting in heavy seas with 7 people on board. The ship, the Lowestoft-based Oak Lee, appears to have suffered engine failure about 60 miles off Humberside. Gale force winds and heavy rain have battered the country again today. Forecasters are warning that conditions will get worse later in the week. At least 2 people are thought to have drowned and hundreds of motorists have been stranded on flooded roads.
Just as yesterday's damage was being repaired, a new crop of power lines was scythed down by today's gales. Thousands of homes have been affected, with power cuts in areas as far apart as Kent and Yorkshire. For those venturing out, journeys have been hazardous. Motorists were advised to avoid part of Dumfries in Scotland, where the River Nith flooded. Northern Ireland has suffered storm-force winds and there's the threat of severe blizzards. Further south, both the Humber and Severn bridges were closed to high vehicles. And this evening's ferry from New Haven to Dieppe was cancelled because of rough seas. Forecasters say the winds could get worse in Scotland tomorrow, and it'll be colder everywhere. A truly bleak midwinter.
Doctors are still looking for a new heart for a 1-week-old baby after an offer from Spain turned out to be unsuitable. Christy Strachan is on a life support machine at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and doctors say that if a suitable donor is not found soon, he could have only days to live. Now, with news of a record-breaking performance by Desert Orchid and the rest of the day's sport, here's Rob Bonnet.
The country's favourite racehorse, Desert Orchid, won the King George VI chase for a record 4th time at Kempton Park today. Defeats earlier in the season had led to speculation that the horse's retirement might be imminent. Now, Desert Orchid's owner is already talking about another appearance next year. Approaching the 7th fence from home, the distinctive grey was second to the leader Sabin du Loir, who then fell in Desert Orchid's path. But jockey Richard Dunwoody manoeuvred the 9-4 favourite around the faller, and from then on, Desert Orchid dominated the closing stages. Commentary from Peter Bromley.
He's over safely. He's got the race won. They're not going to catch the grey. He's back in form. What a performance. 25 yards to go. The crowd is going wild. The hats are flying. 4 wins in the King George.
It was a victory and a reception even more rousing than before. Desert Orchid is now a likely runner in this season's Cheltenham Gold Cup, but a first appearance at the Grand National is most unlikely, largely because of fears for the horse's safety. First, Desert Orchid, second, Toby Tobias, and third, The Fellow. Football and Liverpool's lead at the top of the Barclays League has been cut to 4 points. This morning they were held to a 1-1 draw at Queen's Park Rangers. An own goal by Bruce Grobbelaar provided Rangers with an equaliser midway through the second half. Alan Smith scored twice for Arsenal in their win over Derby. Mark Bright scored the second of Crystal Palace's 2 late goals against Sunderland, and Lee Chapman scored twice for Leeds as they beat Chelsea at Elland Road. So, at the top of the First Division, Arsenal make up ground on Liverpool. Palace stay third, but Leeds go above Tottenham, who lost 2-0 at Coventry. Manchester United beat Norwich 3-0. In the Second Division, a Trevor Morley goal helped West Ham beat Oldham, and Steve Bull's late goal completed Wolves' comeback at Sheffield Wednesday. Those 2 results mean that West Ham go back to the top, and that Sheffield Wednesday drop behind Middlesbrough, who won 1-0 at Ipswich. Notts County won 1-0 at Blackburn. England's cricketers recovered from a poor start after winning the toss in the second test against Australia in Melbourne. At the close of the first day, they'd made 239 for 4 in their first innings.
Graham Gooch back at the test helm, but his return didn't immediately improve England's fortunes. His opening partner, Mike Atherton, out for naught to Bruce Reid, and then the captain himself encountering familiar problems against Terry Alderman. England in trouble on 30 for 2. The supporters had one remedy, Wayne Larkins another. His highest test score of 64 began England's fight back.
Because it's one of the great comebacks by Wayne Larkins. That goes for 4.
The recovery faltered when Robin Smith fell to Hughes for 30, a victim of the thinnest edge to wicketkeeper Healy. Before long, Larkins had gone too. His lapse in concentration left England on 152 for 4. But fears of a further collapse were dispelled by the 5th wicket pair of Alex Stewart
straight back down the ground
and David Gower, who overcame a wrist injury to reach 73 not out.
That was a really good stroke.
England 239 for 4 at the close, not yet a commanding position, but at least the chance to establish one.
And that's all the news and sport on Boxing Day. Good night.
Hello, the windy weather that we've experienced over the last few days is going to continue for a few days yet. This is this day's system, and as that moves away, it'll be followed by other frontal systems, strong winds coming across the Atlantic. So I think for the next few days we're going to find gales, severe gales, even storm force winds in places. Let's have a look at the winds through tonight and tomorrow. A very windy night, especially in these western hills and coast. Tomorrow some very stormy winds getting across Scotland, Northern Ireland and parts of northern England, and even down in some parts of the southwest. The winds could still get up to gale force at times. So that means that winds in Scotland are likely to gust to 80 miles an hour. There'll be some blizzards and drifting snow across the higher ground. Tonight then, the showers continuing around many of these western and northern hills and coasts. The temperatures falling back to around 3 or 4. Just here and there could be a touch of frost, but mainly probably too much wind. Tomorrow a showery day for all of us. Some places in the south may be escaping the showers, but as you come north, the showers become more frequent, heavier, and the showers of hail, sleet and snow, some very heavy snow in some of the high ground of Scotland. There's the winds again tomorrow, just to remind you of those stormy winds coming across Scotland. And temperature-wise, well, it's going to be a much colder day. The top temperature in the south around about 9. That's it from me. Good night to you.
Christmas on BBC1. Lenny live and unleashed.
I had a friend called Dave who was a white guy. I went to college with him. And he really wanted to be black. We were so different. I'd go around to his house. Dave, you coming out for a game of football? He'd say, well then. My woman just put on a pot of chicken and some rice.
Lenny live and unleashed. Tomorrow at 11:50 on BBC1.
Now on BBC One, the uncovering of a mysterious burial ground puts the shivers up Jo Beth Williams, Craig T. Nelson and Heather O'Rourke in our late-night horror movie. But don't sit too close to the edge of your seats, because the Earth is about to move with the force of Poltergeist II.
chua cái xe tàu ăn tạ của và kia tôi nè cô và nhiều mua và tôi apinas và nhiều mua
Tina.
Over here! I think we finally found the core. We dug under the swimming pool.